Good morning to those of you joining us from Asia. Good morning to those, rather good afternoon. Good morning to those joining us from Europe, and a very good morning to any of those of you actually getting up in North America to join us. This is the first and keynote speech of a 3-day Conduct and Culture Summit being run by Armstrong Wolf. And I'm simply delighted today to have Michael Colfontaine, Chairman of the Association of AFME, and also Ursula Schleiser, who former global CAO for Legg Mason. In fact, my time with Michael goes back. The first time I ever met Michael, 2015. The first conversation we ever had was around the role of conduct. And actually, Ursula has been tremendously helpful in my business over the last 12 months, particularly supporting women in the CAO community and its individual purpose. The panel will be introduced later by Ursula. This morning will be a keynote speech by Michael, and then we're handing the reins to Ursula to moderate. I hope you enjoy this session. We're tremendously honored to have you, Michael. Thank you very much. I'm handing the baton to you, sir.
Well, wonderful. And thank you, Maurice. Certainly, financial services is abuzz with the words purpose, culture, conduct. And particularly as organizations seek to use COVID as a real catalyst for change. I'm delighted to be with you around the world today. And as Maurice mentioned, I have the privilege of chairing the Association for Financial Markets in Europe. And I also chair the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments and on the board of the Market Standards Board. And I thank and commend Maurice, Gwen, Armstrong Wolf for organizing this summit. I think it is particularly timely as organizations are recognizing that the impact that COVID pandemic has had on the financial services industry. Every firm has had to very swiftly initiate their business continuity plans, reviewing and making changes across their entire organization. And employers and employees have had to reconsider their priorities and manage in this exceptional and, dare I say, prolonged situation as well. The financial services industry has proven resilient, and with undoubted government and central bank support, and particularly forbearance on some of the rules and regulations, has very quickly overcome and dealt with all of the initial challenges and the sustained challenges. And the new environment within which firms are currently operating is currently characterized by a very different set of risks and a renewed focus on corporate culture and an increasingly complex set of pressures and demands from across the business, from clients, from employees, as well as regulators. And I think we're all really feeling that. These factors are impacting how we make decisions, and certainly impacting the established governance models that have guided boards and business leaders for the last several decades. Firms must ensure that their management can be exceptionally agile in this constantly evolving landscape and prioritize the safety and well-being of the company's employees and customers has been really commendable. COVID has demonstrated that good governance and a clear sense of corporate purpose can be absolutely essential to achieving long-term objectives and resilience. And even before the pandemic had overwhelmed our society and business models and personal lives, the mainstream view is that purpose has, particularly the purpose of the company, the corporation, has evolved. The traditional emphasis on shareholder value is no longer the sole consideration. And corporate purpose, as we all know and believe, needs to go beyond shareholder value, and it should be about producing solutions and impacts, not just profits. Oxford professor Colin Mayer puts it in a simple sentence: corporate purpose should produce profitable solutions to problems of people and planet, and not to profit from producing problems for people or planet. And the balancing the shareholders' expectations of a maximum return against other priorities is one of the principles for corporate management. The legitimate concerns of employees, of regulators and other stakeholders demands all of our attention. And this is even more urgent when we consider that a strong and growing body of evidence shows a positive link between corporate strategies that focus on societal needs and employee engagement and strong financial performance. If a corporation's statement of purpose is indeed credible, demonstrating a real commitment to profiting from solving problems, it builds trust and authenticity, as well as loyalty and engagement with clients, employees, suppliers, the communities in which we operate, as well as providing a clear and engaging opportunity for that narrative with regulators. Major companies around the world have started to make very public commitments to be driven by corporate purpose beyond profits and promise to deliver positive outcomes for society. As an example, in August 2019, before the pandemic, nearly 200 CEOs in the US Business Roundtable signed the statement on purpose of their corporation, pledging to lead their companies with a purpose to benefit all stakeholders. The statement was supported by CEOs from many of the world's leading companies, including JP Morgan, Bank of America, Apple, Amazon. And the signatories committed to delivering value to their customers and to investing in their employees by supporting them through training and education that help develop new skills for this rapidly changing world. Furthermore, they pledged to support the communities in which we work, as well as to generate long-term value for shareholders who provide the capital that allows companies to invest, grow, and innovate. And this commitment to communities has clearly been amplified by Black Lives Matter and all of the societal stresses that are created and inequalities created as a result of the pandemic. Corporate purpose plays a key role in the financial services industry as well. Firms need to inspire trust, create socially responsible products, and prevent future financial crises. The industry is therefore working to meet regulatory, their own, and societal expectations. And as financial services continue to rapidly change, not least under the extreme changes in technology, a sense of external purpose may help preserve good behaviors and values. And purpose can provide an anchor to new activities and products during change and innovation. All activities must be presented to customers in a way that can be clearly understood and conveys clear benefits. As an example, Bitcoin futures and perhaps contracts for difference may lack the straightforwardness to the end user or consumer, making it difficult to understand whether they are truly making and meeting a need. I would like to highlight how purpose is closely linked to culture, but differs from it as it extends from a single company, beyond a single company or industry sector, and can inspire change outside the core business. For example, financial institutions are absolutely considering the environment and societal consequences of their actions. And this shows an increasing commitment to look beyond simple profit and loss to the wider outcomes. This is an acknowledgement that certainly banks can drive responsible social behavior as an outcome of how they do business, even when it may negatively impact their bottom line. And perhaps without a clear purpose, financial institutions will be unable to prepare for the future in a coherent and sustainable way, and may lack the necessary clarity about what drives innovation and profit to ensure that it is not simply achieved by exploiting a position of advantage. Recently, the UK regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, has promoted extensive work on corporate purpose in financial services. And after launching in March 2018 their Transforming Culture initiative with the publication of a discussion paper and a conference, the FCA set up a series of working groups to explore the concept of purpose from the perspective of the financial services industry. The aim of the work was to highlight the importance of the topic for each firm to discover its own purpose in the ecosystem and encourage a much broader discussion and explore in more depth from a variety of perspectives, so firms understand the importance of defining and delivering their own purpose. Through the Purpose in Financial Services Wholesale Sector Roundtable, AFME contributed its thoughts to the FCA Purpose Working Group. And this work highlighted how, although most wholesale financial services firms have a published purpose, values, strategies, or pillars, the purpose is set at the board level and not particularly well understood or not followed at middle management level. And thus the first key point is to ensure that purpose is actually embedded throughout the whole business in order to animate the entire organization. The FIC Market Standards Board, with whom I co-authored an essay for the FCA's Culture Initiative, has been instrumental in developing industry standards for conduct in wholesale FIC markets so that they are more transparent, fair, and effective for all participant users in those markets. Purpose underpins the effectiveness and integration of good practice across the industry. And in particular, the FMSB has been providing a spotlight on the imminent transition to alternative risk-free rates, the LIBOR transition. Furthermore, another issue which must be urgently addressed is the conflict between long-term aspirations of corporate purpose statements and the short-term demands of markets that wholesale firms are engaged in. While shareholders and regulators are beginning to inspire change, the experience shows that executive teams and boards in both the sell-side banks and trading firms and among users of wholesale finance on the buy-side investment managers and amongst corporations are still overwhelmingly judged on short-term results. Professional bodies such as the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment also play a key role in the creation of new market standards and in the promotion of corporate purpose. They monitor and implement their codes of conduct with rigor and, where appropriate, take disciplinary action. Professional bodies can be extremely effective in improving behavioral standards and instilling their members with an ethical culture, change and sense of greater purpose, and keeping them informed of what is and what is not acceptable. The CISA essay, Restoring Trust, the case for the retail financial services industry to rethink its purpose, demonstrates how firms that possess a wider purpose tend to see four main benefits: a better working relationship, enhanced stability and resilience, client and customer goodwill, and reputational benefits. And I'd like to mention that in March 2020, the CISI, together with Quilter and Tomorrow's Company, proposed a British statement on the purpose of the financial services business that took inspiration from the previously mentioned US Business Roundtable document. Similarly, the British statement would call for companies to commit to delivering value to customers while always dealing with them fairly and ethically, to investing in employees, to supporting the communities and societies in which our firms work, as well as protecting the environment and generating long-term value for shareholders. To conclude, given the vital role that the financial services industry plays in the economic life and growth of the country, financial businesses have the duty to engage in responsible stewardship, developing policies and practices which are deeply rooted in those values. Regulators can, of course, also play their part, and whilst enforcement against minor technical breaches, of course, has merit, perhaps greater gains can be made with more focus on senior management of firms, establishing and understanding the strength of the firm's culture and purpose, and identifying where poor culture and poor purpose have been demonstrated, and holding and using the powers of the senior management regime to hold management accountable. As I said before, 2020 and 2021 have been crucial years for companies to live up to their commitments. The COVID-19 pandemic placed purpose at the top of the corporate agenda, and the disruption caused by the pandemic now provides companies with an opportunity to transform and accelerate that transformation by defining the organization for the future, resolving long-standing issues, and refreshing business and operating models with the purpose as acting as a key guide for decision-making. The pandemic has presented CEOs with perhaps the greatest challenge to their personal resilience. Chief executives of the world's largest institutions are using this unparalleled moment to lead and increase purpose and impact, both societal and economic. Purpose can help CEOs understand what needs to be done to meet the needs of their stakeholders and to redesign and rewire their businesses for tomorrow's reality. Finally, I'd like to mention several key actions which might be implemented to strengthen corporate purposes. First, executives need to lead by example by demonstrating commitment to corporate purpose and sound business culture. Corporate purpose should be demonstrably animate an organization and embedded throughout the company. As we know, credibility is an essential yet fragile element in effective leadership. Authentic actions will demonstrate a company's genuine commitment to societal purpose. Companies might track and disclose performance metrics related to their purpose to their stakeholders. The ability to quantify performance through clear metrics is critical for measuring progress against purpose. And perhaps the technology sector has many lessons that financial services can learn in this matter. It is also critical to reflect on how purpose can drive value creation. For example, research has shown that companies that protect their employees during crisis can maintain high levels of employee engagement and productivity, enhance client engagement, and enhancing regulatory relationships. Similarly, companies that focus on generating business solutions that address emerging social and societal needs may experience greater innovation, identify new opportunities that drive revenue and customer loyalty. And finally, corporate purpose might be and must be, I would argue, clearly communicated to shareholders. Investor interest in how companies perform against their purpose is higher than ever. Therefore, companies which seek to understand which issues their investors deem material and proactively engage in a dialogue on these issues. And we're seeing that certainly on the environment agenda ahead of COP26. It is true that challenges ahead are not easy, not least on measurement. However, I would like to conclude by saying that I am confident that through deep analysis, open communication, and transparency, firms and certainly the AFME membership have the right tools to restructure and prepare for the long term in the new working environment. Thank you all for your attention, and I very much look forward to participating in what I'm sure is going to be a really informed and stimulating debate on our panel, which is going to be led for us, as Maurice suggested, by Ursula. Thank you all for listening.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. I just want to be sure that we are now switched over to the panel from the organizers.
We are indeed. Thank you, Ursula.
Great. Thank you very much. So thank you all for joining and listening in on this really, really important topic. I think, as Michael has indicated, the heightened focus of culture and conduct is shaping how the financial services industry is and will be and need to evolve. Firms that have a healthy culture and a clear corporate purpose, importantly, that embraces, considers, and is understood by all stakeholders, not only shareholders, but customers, employees, as well as the community in which we operate. Those are the companies, in my opinion, that are going to be leading the way. And I think, again, as Michael had said, the COVID pandemic has only heightened how organizations have had to adapt, and organizational leaders have had to rethink how they engage with all their stakeholders. So with that background, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce the panel for our discussion. Please do send any questions you may have, because we'd like to be able to address those and make this as interactive as one can, albeit at the forum that we have. So on the panel, pleased to say that Michael Colfontaine will be joining the panel as well. We have Sam Willis, who's from JP Morgan Corporate Investment Bank. Sam is based in Hong Kong and is joining us from Hong Kong. She is the corporate risk lead, as well as for Asia, the culture and conduct lead. So Sam, welcome to the panel. We also have Sonia Jackman, who is EMEA Chief Controls Officer for BNY Mellon. Sonia is responsible for maintaining consistent control framework in the first line of defense for BNY Mellon, but also is co-chair of the EMEA Conduct and Culture Council, where she plays a leading role in how to embed BNY Mellon's purpose, value, and behavior in the organization. So welcome, Sonia. We are looking forward to your insights. And then also from Hong Kong, we have joining us Michael Footman, who is a partner of financial services risk and regulation practice. He has broad experience in working with large financial institutions in how to execute risk and the regulatory engagement, and importantly around governance culture as well. So really a great panel. And as I say, please send through your questions. But perhaps I'll start with a question from a practical perspective, and picking up on one of Michael's points that corporate purpose needs to go beyond the shareholder value. It needs to really embrace all stakeholders. Sonia, can I perhaps turn to you as just to start this, to give some practical examples in terms of how your organization or organizations that you are monitoring have actually, what they have done to implement sort of practices that will benefit all stakeholders?
Thanks, Ursula. Yes, one of my very valued co-contributors in this, Rosie Warren from Kin & Co, always use the, for people to understand purpose, for purpose to be embedded, it needs to be known. So people need to be aware of it. It needs to be believed. So it needs to be consistent with what the leaders' behaviors portray. And then thirdly, it needs to be owned. So it needs to be that really, people make it part of how they operate. So at BNY Mellon, we have recently re-articulated our purpose statement, and we have certainly enhanced our values and the behaviors with some more subtle points that recognize the society in which we operate now. And for example, we've always had integrity as one of our core values in the firm, and that I don't think will ever change. However, we have brought nuances around the behaviors that we require, that we say we do what is right always, yes. And then we also say we challenge each other, even when it is uncomfortable. Now, that nuance is not something we've had before, but it certainly flows with the speaking up culture that we are trying to establish. Another example, we always had teamwork as one of our core values, and we have refined that to say strength in diversity is our core value. And it means that we seek out who is missing and help everyone feel included, and we invest in each other's success. So there's these subtle changes that really help to shape the new kind of behaviors that we want to see underpinning our corporate purpose. And so we're on a long journey to embed this through exercises of visualization, through storytelling, and then through really embedding it right through the organizational fabric. I hope that helps.
I know that's excellent, and perhaps I can turn to Sam to see what JP Morgan has done, or again any firm that you that you value, in terms of really a practical example of how the organization has embedded corporate purpose.
Yeah, sure. And I just need to open up by saying these are going to be my personal views, not those of JP Morgan that I'm sharing today on this panel discussion. So I think actually complementing what Sonia has just shared, I think from within our organisation, I mean, Michael touched upon it in terms of what our chairman and CEO did with the leading the business roundtable back in August 2019, which was really, as the chairman of that group, really sort of setting the redefinition of what corporate success is all around, and really serving all stakeholders, including our communities, our suppliers, our employees, and our customers. And I think, Jamie has really taken that through to living and breathing that within our organisation. And in fact, in the 2020 letter to shareholders recently published, one of the 6 sections that was included was all about the corporate citizen and the purpose of corporation, where he laid out in detail the large amount that we are trying to do and the roles that we're playing sort of in public policy through to investment in communities, both financially, but then also in sort of more practical financial terms, whether it be the 45 billion that we lent in investments to small community developments, to affordable housing and small business growth last year, or whether it's redesigning business branches in low to medium income communities where we're looking at products and services that really meet their needs, and also helping them, educate them so they can understand what it is to be financially capable, and also giving them tools so they can learn to save frequently, to providing low-cost loans, through to offering skills and retraining programs, whether it be for helping to advance the racial equality, or whether it be to retraining individuals with criminal records. And in America, 1 in 3 adults does have a criminal record, so it's a big priority for us, because you want to have access to many skills and many talents. Climate change, another big priority for our organisation, and there was a big announcement last week of the investment that we're going to make over the coming 10 years. Or helping cities such as Detroit over the last 5 years, a huge amount has been invested really to regenerate that economic growth, bringing new skills and training, and offering small businesses the expansion of financial capability. So I think there's some of the examples that we have as our organisation on the macro scale, and of course, we are all also sort of encouraged to participate on very much on the local volunteering side as well, which I can touch upon later.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Michael Footman, from your perspective, and you obviously see it from your own organization, but also from others that you may be working with, what are some examples that you have seen in terms of how companies have evolved to focus on purpose, and what are the practical things that they are doing to put that into place?
Sure. Look, I think, I mean, just echoing some of the views, I think that we have seen that movement in terms of whether shareholder value has really started to move beyond the focus on profitability. I think we are seeing that movement, but I do think if you look at it, there is still quite a strong bias actually in terms of the measurement towards shareholder return. That being said, I think a lot of the initiatives which Sonia and Sam touched on are actually really great examples of what institutions are doing across the board in terms of the external as well as the internal aspects. I guess one thing which I thought I'd touch on maybe is probably more around just how the community aspect comes into that, because that's ultimately where we're trying to deliver value and drive services, right? And really in some institutions, the way that I've seen them engaging with the community is starting to try and understand where are actually the needs in terms of, it might be very simple bits of infrastructure or something like that, which they can contribute to. And so if I look at some of the examples, and this is overseas from my experience when I was based in Australia, so some of the more community integrated ones would be able to identify through their dialogues with stakeholders in the community, whether businesses or the like, in terms of where they saw some pain points. And actually, because of the connectivity they've got, the resources they had, they could actually engage the community and think about what they want to put some money towards. Now, that community engagement and dialogue actually drove a very constructive relationship actually, and there was a real perception of the institution giving back to the community. And off the back of that, once you've got interaction and they feel they're part of the decision-making process, that positive feeling comes through a lot more. People start to understand a bit more about what the corporate purpose of a very large institution is and what that means for an individual. So I saw those kind of things as very meaningful ways in which they can interact with the community and help people understand what the purpose of these big institutions are. The other angle I have seen, and again, this is more from the personal aspect that we see from employees at financial institutions. So when we run focus groups to help people understand the culture of the organization, the drivers of behavior, one of the things which some of the employees felt very proud about was when the firm's CSR initiatives get called out. And this isn't through the internal blast emails, but it's very much when friends and family were saying, oh, I've heard XYZ Bank is involved in this. What are you guys doing about it? They really want to know more about it. And it really helped to bring the individual into a bit more of the bank's world, but at the same time into their friends and families world. So it's really making them feel a bit more part of society, actually. So I think that personal aspect is something which I think is really important, making things practical and meaningful for people.
Again, great examples, and perhaps a good segue into one of my next questions, which is, given that there is such a focus on short-term financial results still, although things are obviously evolving, and Michael Cole-Fontaine, perhaps turning to your one of the points that you mentioned, which is that there's a strong and growing body of evidence that shows a positive link between corporate strategies that focus on societal needs and superior financial performance. And given some of the examples that we've heard, is how can companies best measure this and measure their success against each of the sort of supporting their longer term goals from a corporate purpose perspective? So maybe we'll start with Michael Cole-Fontaine and then move to our other speakers.
Thank you, Ursula. And I think they come, opportunities come from a variety of studies. So Professors Sisodia, Sheff, Wolf, back in 2007 said that those companies, and here it was just a sense of purpose, measured in terms of social impact. So we've spoken about a lot of the great work that has been alluded to is being done in communities, outperformed the S&P 500 by about 1.5 times. We've seen the productivity of the purpose-driven employee is 125% higher than that of the satisfied employee, and that comes around about as one of the Bain and Co studies. 90% of executives surveyed by the Korn Ferry Group say that a commitment to purpose-driven leadership produces long-term financial benefits. And certainly in a world of hyper-competitive competition for top talent, the Harvard Business Review reports that 9 out of 10 employees are prepared to take a pay cut for more meaningful work. So I think those are just some of the stats. So how do we take those and measure those internally? It's going to be from levels of employee engagement. It's going to be from the client engagement surveys. And it's going to be from the speed and appetite with which colleagues respond to requests for training. We're all deluged within financial services with mandatory training, but it's how we approach the discretionary training. It's how we approach and take pride in being compliant with what our organizations request and require of us. And I think those are some of the ways in which we can think about measurement. But this is not easy, because we're asking companies and particularly leaders to develop and embed incredibly challenging new skills, and in financial services, which is a very controlled environment, to go from don't make mistakes to try and celebrate mistakes, to go from control to empowerment. And we've seen that work exceptionally well during the pandemic. Ursula, hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you. And sort of feeds well. Perhaps I can pass the question on to Sonia in terms of what are you doing, what's your firm doing in terms of measuring, then importantly, I think also communicating throughout the organization as well as to your stakeholders, the broader stakeholders, how you are performing against your corporate purpose, just to keep it embedded and keep it alive.
Thanks, Ursula. And I was just reflecting while Michael was talking. So Michael left BNY Mellon pretty much the time that I joined. And he was one of the core reasons why I actually joined BNY Mellon permanently, because I was consulting to him previously. And it was part of that, Michael mentioned the statistic, 9 out of 10 people they just want to do a more meaningful job, but they also want to feel that they are at home in an organization. And, very much that sense, I still remember the day of Michael's farewell. And when I decided this is an organization where I want to work in, just because of the fact that the incoming CEO hugged Michael for like 2 minutes, right? And then the choir sang, and I just thought, oh, yeah, I can work. But to get back to your point around how do we do this over the longer term? So we've got our corporate social responsibility report, which I think previously was almost something that people said separately. We have now become much more integrated in what we do and how we monitor our purpose. And we have certainly in BNY Mellon set three very distinct pillars in our corporate social responsibility. One is around culture and purpose. And we focus there on diversity and inclusion. We focus on leadership. How do we lead purposefully? We focus on employee engagement and on community partnership. And we've got a series of indicators that we measure and that we aim for and that we track and progress over 5 years, so 2020 to 2025. And the next pillar is around responsible business, where we focus on risk management, technology enablement, and ESG client solutions. So our green and blue bonds that we issue and that we sponsor, very much a core part of our sustainability and what we bring to our clients for solutions that they can access. And then our global citizenship, where we focused on, our contribution to climate change, supply chain. What do we do? Is it a diverse supply chain? Is it environmentally friendly supply chain? How we support public policy and human rights. And those are our 5-year longer term goal that we very publicly commit to and measure.
That's excellent, thank you. Michael Footman, any thoughts on the measurement and the communication and how keep this alive within the organization?
Yeah, I think it's the example Sonia gave around sort of setting standards and expectations is really important, because the way that I look is very much around organizations need to have a very clear statement around the value, purpose, and vision for the future. If you've got that in place, then it's around how you really enable the individuals to understand what that is and make the right decisions to perform the way that the company is expecting them to. But more importantly, to keep people honest, we always need a bar in terms of what we're going to measure ourselves against. And until there's metrics or something put against that, it becomes something which you struggle to drive consistency and making sure everybody's moving the same way. So I totally agree with the directional description there. I think what I see is that there's areas where this is probably further advanced, and so I see things like ESG, right, as something where there's a lot of talk around whether or not there's a requirement for something equivalent to the International Accounting Standards Board, whether or not you have Sustainability Standards Board, which will then set out common criteria for firms to measure themselves against. Then you have an element of comparability. Now, if you've got that, then you continue pushing the bar forward. People will continue to look for ways to outperform. They'll compare themselves to peers, and again, they'll find different pockets where we can do better here, or other things that they want to focus on. So I think directionally, totally agree with you. I think one of the real challenges for organizations is how you get the MI to measure some of the more personal behaviors around that. Because ultimately a lot of the data which is collected by institutions is quantitative, so it's factual. A lot of what we're trying to understand here is very qualitative, and what's the reasoning behind that. And so what we see in a lot of institutions, especially at the more senior levels, is how you incorporate things like 360 feedback, making sure you understand what business partners look like, control functions look like, customers, as well as the regulators for some individuals actually. And that really then starts to give that softer feeling in terms of whether or not the individual is on the right journey for the organization, and whether or not you need to intervene in any way to support them. But again, it's very people driven. So how you can cascade this down at scale is quite challenging when you get beyond a certain level. The way we see some of the other firms addressing that is obviously through the employee surveys. And for most of the individuals on this particular video conference, I'm sure it's second nature to be polling and asking for responses on this. But I think it's really how you can get a bit more deeper into, other than this is what we saw, this is what we got as a response. The questions then should be, well, why have they responded this way? And actually, is this the kind of thing which we were expecting? So really applying a bit of a critical thing to see, are we being given things which people think we want to hear, if we have any doubts on that? Or if not, is there anything else hidden in here which we should be trying to read into further in order to take further action?
Yeah, all very relevant points. Sam, what about
Yeah,
your measurement?
absolutely agree with what Sonia and Michael have said. I mean, we have we have it as one of our business principles around we help strengthen the communities in which we live and work. That is part of integral into our mandatory training. It's part of our priorities that we get assessed against. But I think it's more than that, just on the formal side of things. It's really just picking up a little bit on the how do you cascade it down. And it really needs to be a bit of a surround sound, multi-pronged sort of, it needs to be something you live and breathe throughout your time, right? It's not just a right priorities once a year sort of thing. And so, I mean, I think what we try and do is whether it be formally through, the documents that Jamie puts out publicly, but also we have a large number of communications down from the operating committee that set the tone, that keep on reinforcing, and update us as well. Regular updates on our intranet sites, town halls, and then to sort of day to day, teams are encouraged to be part of these business resource groups that we have that really are around inclusion and trying to drive that across a number of areas in our organization. And again, there's targets around that. And in 2019, I think we had 43% of all employees across the firm were members of at least one organization of our business resource group. To day to day, if you want to do team building, you're all encouraged to take time off paid leave to go and help and volunteer. And there are a lot of activities that you can do, let's say, as team building one-offs or on a more regular basis to help, with it be reading to children, whether it be helping advise small businesses or mentorship. And I think that in itself has this positive spiral of you do it either to connect more with your colleagues, but you're actually helping and giving back. And I think as I spend more time interviewing new joiners to the team, particularly grads and interns, so this is really important to them. Yes, they want to be paid well, but actually they want to know, what are you doing for the communities? And often they're attracted because they've seen you in the news, as you said previously. So I think that's what we are finding in this space more and more.
Great, thank you. So we've spoken about a lot of the positives and what companies are doing at a positive level. We've also mentioned that COVID has really created a lot of disruption, but also provided that opportunity to transform and enabled companies really to look beyond what previously might have been the challenges to drive the change. So I'm sort of going to say, what have you seen as some of the barriers, some of the challenges that there have been in terms of making sure purpose is understood and that it's embedded and that the organization evolves to really consider all stakeholders? And then, you know, how has your organization addressed some of those barriers and some of those challenges? Perhaps, Sam, if we could just move on and take that question to you before we ask our other panelists.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think, look, some of the challenges are this, as Michael referenced in his keynote speech, right? This is not an easy topic. And I think, you know, there can be that continual pressure from that focus on short-term profits for your shareholders, your traditional shareholders, and that fear of being the first mover as well, of, you know, if all your competitors or, you know, colleague peers aren't doing that. But I think, you know, being brave, being look forward looking. And I think people have got to that stage, but I think it comes down to, you know, internally, you know, it is tricky. You know, in our organization, my organization, there's sort of 260,000 people across 60 countries. How do you really make it relevant to people on a day-to-day basis? And how do you really reinforce it? And a lot of that comes down to, yes, tone from the top that we've spoken about, but it really is more important, increasingly more important for the middle managers to feel empowered, to feel bought in, to make it relevant to their teams, I think. And, you know, when you're operating in so many different cultures, it is really difficult to make something that can be set in by HQ relevant and real and authentic. And I think that is really the art that we need to be helping our supervisors and managers sort of feel empowered and give them the skills that they can then do that, you know, to create the right culture in their teams. Because at the end of the day, that's who people, you know, interact with. You know, we don't interact with our CEOs and operating committee day to day. So I think that's some of the challenges that we've got there. And I mean, how do we address it? I think it's just you just got to keep talking about it. You've got to make it part of everyday conversation. You've got to make it part of the DNA. I mean, we do have awards, CEO awards, which really pick up on, you know, our key business principles and recognise above and beyond individuals of all levels. And so it's you know, there are different ways, different levers that you can pull in addition to the traditional emails and town halls. But I think it's, as Sonia said, this is a journey. We've got a long way to go. And you know, just as you think you might have kind of made a bit of progress, the world will change and then you've got to adapt, right? You've got to be agile and nimble the whole time. You've got to stay on the front foot, and you've got to be not afraid to fail fast and then pick up and then go forward. And I think that is also something that's really important for us as a manager and senior leaders to say that it's okay. Like, you know, we made a mistake, but we realized it and we moved forward and we corrected it. So yeah, that's just some thoughts.
There's so much there that, you know, Sam, that I could just so relate to. I think from the communication that you talk about and that equipping line managers, it has never been as important as it is now in this remote working situation that we are in. And our reliance on line managers to be really our torch bearers is so important, but we have to equip them as well to make sure that they've got the tools that they can draw upon. To that end, we've got a network of conduct and culture champions that really, you know, support those discussions, those sort of live discussions and team discussions about purpose, values, behaviors. And the activation plan for our purpose, values, and behaviors really helped to focus as well. So the executive committee started it and they sort of debated which of the behaviors, they were tasked with the behaviors that they would find the most challenging, to really explore that. And in our activation toolkit that we're rolling out now to the broader organization, that we ask teams to consider, you know, what habits do they need to form to help exercise that muscle that may be underdeveloped. You know, for example, I talked about previously our value was teamwork, but teamwork, it's easy to go to the people you know, right? And you say, oh, we do very well in teamwork, but you may not have included everyone. So that sort of have I really considered who's the right people to include and developing that muscle. We're asking in really active team discussions for teams to come up in their regions and in their businesses. What are the things that they practically could do differently to embed those values? But it's not easy, right? It is hard, but it is also really interesting.
No, that's excellent. Thank you, Sonia. Michael Footman, what are your thoughts around some of the challenges and barriers?
Yeah, look, I think that at the end of the day, this is all people, right? And people challenges are always the most difficult ones to solve because people are people. I think that there's always a view that the tone from the top is quite clear in terms of what we're asking people to do. The echo from the bottom, if you like, can be a little bit varied. And so that understanding piece on day one is really quite fundamental to the whole thing. The regulators here also focused on that quite a lot when they asked institutions to really focus on trying to articulate to different levels of the organization what is so-called desirable as opposed to undesirable behaviors, and really giving real examples of this to make it meaningful. So I think that's definitely one of the key challenges. I think the other one is the size and complexity of the organizations we're talking about means that there's a huge mass of competing priorities. And as a result of that, conflict to an extent is inevitable, because you've got a big population of people who are very much focused on what we do now. How do we make processes more effective or more efficient? How do I use technology, bring it in? How do I try out new things there? You also got a population of people who are looking at, why are we doing this? Is this the right thing to be doing, or should we be deselecting maybe clients' activities or certain functions which are being performed? And when you start thinking about that, then you're really starting to get into a bit more purpose, because you're really asking a much more higher value question there. But then you get to the third level of the organization, where you're really asking, well, what should we be doing to remain relevant to the industry or our clients, or what should we be doing to even just to survive in this environment? And so because of those three very broad categories there of priorities people have, it's very difficult to reconcile different views in order to get a outcome for everybody that is a win-win. So I think really for leaders then, the challenge here is, how do you find a way to align the goals of these individuals so that they're really enabling the individual to be successful in their role, at the same as the organization achieving the higher level purpose. And I think that's a really tough one for leaders to balance, actually, in the current climate. In particular, if you've got COVID and people aren't really dealing with each other face to face, some of these things are very hard to find because they're not on the surface. They're much deeper in terms of why things are set up the way they are. So to me, I think that in order to address that, there's a few things to be focused on. One is potentially a bit of an education piece for people to make sure they really understand the corporation's expectations as well as how they fit into that. The second is around how they incentivize collaboration to make sure that you avoid the silos. All the handshakes are in place. People really can work properly as a broader team. And importantly as well, I think accountability is a very important part of that, because if that's forgotten, then you can have issues there, because people will not keep this front of mind through the day-to-day.
Well, that's excellent. Thanks. And we've got a lot of actually questions coming through as well. So perhaps what I'm going to do is move on to one of the other questions I had, but also take up a question that we've received from the audience to address that. And we'll start with Michael Cole-Fontaine. But for me, we've been speaking a lot about strong and consistent leadership is absolutely key in driving conduct and culture and supporting corporate purpose. And what I was going to ask my panelists is, what are their thoughts for the audience? Very diverse group of leaders who most certainly are responsible for diverse functions as well. And one of the questions that we have, and Michael Cole-Fontaine, if we can start with you, what do you feel the role of the COO is or could be in shaping purpose and embedding it into the business and the industry as a whole? And that for me kind of links back into this whole leadership question, is what is the role of our leaders and our audience and the COO in this case in terms of driving that? Michael, if Cole-Fontaine, if we could start with you before we go to the other panelists, that would be great.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question from the audience. The COO operating officer is an absolutely critical role, because it's in effect taking and translating the corporate strategy and the corporate purpose into everything that is actionable, and that word embedding, and critical to the chief operating officer's mandate is doing this in a controlled, sustainable, and resilient way. And that puts a lot of pressure on the role, not least because we're also trying, as both Sam and Sonia and Michael mentioned, experiment. We're trying to learn, we're trying to iterate, and we're trying to fail fast. And it'll often be the COO role who will determine how fast is fast enough, how soon to recommend or pull the plug, how soon to cut back on financing the initiative. And I think that makes the role really critical, whether it's within a business line, at a corporate level. Most mature businesses will have the role of the chief operating officer, and absolutely critical in delivering and executing and helping embed. And I use the word animate in the remarks I gave, not least because it has to resonate with the employees. And I think if the chief operating officer can really understand the value, and Samantha mentioned it, the business resource groups. So these are what we might once in an earlier stage of maturity called the affinity groups, that then became the employee resource groups. Once you've matured them to business resource groups, these groups can really help provide hugely valuable intelligence to the chief operating officer. So to be able to trial, experiment, and learn.
That's excellent. Thanks. Sam, any thoughts that you can share around leadership and how that can help drive and embed corporate purpose for our audience? Any thoughts there?
I don't want to it's not like sort of teaching everyone to sort of, teach them the obvious, but I think, we've all had it, right? We know when we've all had experiences when leaders have been inspirational and they have truly been leaders. They've stepped up when it's been difficult, they've been visible, they've had the hard conversations, and they've really faced the facts. But I think you need them to be authentic, and you need to be relatable. And I think, because if you are a little bit aloft, then people aren't going to be wanting to be part of that. And if there's a lot going on, they don't feel they can raise it up. And, I think the role is critical to be able to create a culture that allows people to feel it's okay to speak up. And if they don't want to speak up to you, they know who they can go and speak up to, and it can go through those other ways. And I think it's really important as well about having a diverse and talented team, right? I think, you need to have that breadth of thinking, of different views, of just, cognitive differences, which allow you to approach topics in a different way. And you're going to attract different people, which kind of has that onward, upward sort of cycle as well. So I think, I feel we're very fortunate in my organization. I found a culture that I fully can relate to. I feel that it's something that you can be stretched, but there's groups that I can go to if I feel I need, whether it be sounding ideas or I need, challenging. And I think that is what, leaders, a strong leadership needs to have to help move all this forward. And, a very recent example we've touched on it is racial equality discussions. I think it's one of those topics that people haven't always felt they could open up and talk about. But I think what I feel really proud that I've seen over the last year within JP Morgan is, people being openly given the opportunity to share experiences they've had in a safe environment, but also then giving a safe environment for people that have always wanted to ask questions but haven't felt they could, or they haven't wanted to offend. But it's sort of setting that tone and setting that culture so that people can open the dialogue and collectively all sort of move the agenda forward. So I think that for me is a very real example that, you know, we're starting on the journey, but that we've seen.
That's great. And perhaps what I'm going to do is extend the question a little bit, because we have another question from the audience, and I'll Sonia, before I move to you on that one. But the other question from the audience, which is sort of similar about leadership, is how you operationalize such intense and an ever-present challenge for the COO. And how do you convert the intent of the executive to define and embed the purpose into a meaningful result? So again, that's how do you as a COO leadership take this and convert this into a meaningful result? Sonia, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think, again, a few good nuggets coming out of there. I think the COO is in a really good position that sees front to back, right, how the fabric of the organization works, and really got that a custodian role of making sure that the processes work, you know, front to back. And it is that, it is that fostering, and exactly what we're talking about. It's this fostering of an environment where it is safe to share when things are not working out. And never more important as right now. For example, a very practical example is something that we implemented through the COVID process, was a new control exceptions process. So if something failed, how do we get the approval of a new way to implement it much quicker done? And that has really enabled us. It's put people together, and that's a role that a COO can play, you know, to excellence, really creating that network of the right people, make the decision and move forward. And Sam also referred to the, you know, the being able to fail and being able to report on it. I think you have to have the other side as well for leadership. So you need to be able to accept bad news appropriately, right? So otherwise it doesn't work. And it's really how to make your purpose authentic and to make it accessible to people. You need to be able to foster that sort of speaking up and escalation both ways throughout your leadership.
That's excellent. Please, before I turn to Michael Footman, please do keep your questions coming, because these are great. And there was, in fact, a question around, you know, how do you react to mistakes? So you've addressed that, Sonia, but Michael Footman, perhaps if you could give your thoughts around, you know, the role of the COO in shaping the purpose.
Sure. I mean, I like Sonia's comment in terms of the CO being like a custodian, right? I've heard other analogies to the CO being also the bodyguard, as it were, to make sure that everything is protected and run properly. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about scale, right? To make sure that people across the organization can really get a feeling for what's expected from them. So ultimately, it's becoming those water cooler stories, if you like, so that people know what's expected of them without having to go ask or look it up in a policy or procedure. And really the only way for that to get out is for institutions to really be known to be reflecting on what's gone well and what's gone badly, and reflecting in a honest and non-judgmental manner. I think the non-judgmental is the most important part of that, because at the end of the day, everybody's there to continue to improve things. You're a custodian, you want to leave it in a better place than it was when you first picked it up. So I think that mindset's really important to come through. The one thing which I've always thought was great was one of the banks I worked with, they basically explained about how you need to get rid of your work face as quickly as possible so people can get to know you. And when people know you, then they will talk to you and they will understand the stories that you're telling. And it becomes just much more personal because they can relate to that. And once they relate to that and they can connect to it, they will relay the same story to other people. So you've got that echo effect building up very nicely. Once people trust you and they feel that they know you. And so a lot of the time, I mean, when we've got sort of a new COO coming on board, most of the conversation is really just talking about their background and who they are as a person, what motivates them. And when you understand that, when you start getting into real issues and all, and the things that come up every day that are quite painful to deal with at the time, it's just that much easier for people to understand and get through and know that things are going to be handled in an appropriate manner. Because once you get rid of the fear from people, openness, issues come up proactively, you're not going looking for them. And I think just the whole organization benefits from that impact.
Yeah, Michael, you've said that brilliantly, and I would often describe it as seeing it human, and seeing the client as an individual human being. Behind every sovereign wealth fund, there are the citizens of the country. Behind every insurance client, there are all of the individual policyholders. Behind every pension fund, there's the existing or future pensioner. And when we can visualize these people, that word that Sonia had used, I think it makes it much more relatable to the piece of work that the individual employee is doing, whether it's in processing a corporate action through to getting a vote from one place to another, executing a merger and acquisition, and so on.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that point, most certainly from my perspective, that's always been really important, that everyone within the organization truly understands what impact does their role, whatever that role might be, have on the end client. What impact does that role have on their colleagues as they're performing that, and how do you embed that into what you do? And as a COO, where you have a lot of really support functions that continue to drive the business forward, that connection to the end client, that connection to all the stakeholders is really important, because that's the piece that drives it forward. Now we have another great question from the audience, and again I would encourage anybody else who has any questions, please to send those through. And Michael Colfontaine, perhaps we can start with you on this. It's if you could only pick one, controls, culture, or purpose, which one would you choose in relation to mitigating conduct risk? Acknowledging, of course, that you need all three.
Right. I think in financial services, it has to be controls. It's got to be demonstrable. It's got to be woven into the fabric of the organization. And we can say organization, we know we operate often through multiple legal entities. I think Sam mentioned present in 60 countries, multiple different cultures. So having a control framework and a control environment that is consistent and effectively embedded is probably the most important of those three from my perspective, not least because the regulatory environment demands it. And yes, the culture should be immaculate and the purpose should be defined and animating, but the bedrock has got to be how the control environment is established.
Sonia, any thoughts on that? I agree, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm always greedy. I don't want just one. I was really thinking, it's the alignment that absolutely makes it happen. And if you have it's so difficult to have the right controls without having the right behaviors. I call it behaviors or culture. And if that could be, aligned to what your purpose is, which is what we were discussing. So I'm actually cheating here. So sorry about it. But delighted that you think control is so important, Michael. That suits me fine.
That's great. Sam, any thoughts?
I probably would have gone for culture, because I sit in the controls office as well, so I absolutely echo the importance of control framework. But I kind of feel if you've got the right culture where you've got people doing the right thing even when you're not there and not looking, that is the bedrock to then build the controls and and go forward. So I would sort of compliment Michael's controls saying culture.
My gut feel was also to go culture first as well, Sam. But then when I heard Michael talking about it, I was thinking about all the work that we do. It's typically more an extreme version of conduct before the regulators get very upset and we have to come in to do certain work. And so in that kind of a situation, undoubtedly it's controls which need to be there because they haven't been there to deter the behavior. But by and large, for the vast majority of the institution, if the culture is there, the escalations and behaviors will make sure that you become aware of a problem before it became too big a problem. So yeah, I did go with culture for vast majority, but yeah, controls is really for that rather problematic population.
Great question, though.
So we're still waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, but I have one more before I'll sort of turn to everyone just for some closing remarks if we don't get any further questions. And it's really, it goes back to the current environment in which we're operating and really how your firms or where you've seen firms have been able to really use COVID and the very unfortunate scenario and the disruption we have from it, but to look at transforming and really moving beyond some of what previously they may have said, these are challenges, we can't get through, we can't drive this change, what they've actually done. And so if you could perhaps provide just an example of how that fits into purpose, and again, the role of the COO. And I know that's asking a lot and putting a lot of in there, but I think that captures some of the questions that we've had as well. So Michael Cole-Fontaine, why don't I start with you on that? And then...
So one of the things it's maybe obvious to say, but we've been in a continual live stress test through COVID with all of the remote working, the hybrid working that we're evolving to. And I would observe that the control environment that has allowed that and then empowered individuals to operate remotely and to be able to deliver their level of control, strive to maintain that culture of the team, strive to express all of this, most often in the form of this media over screens, has been something that has been quite remarkable. But what it has shown is something that is the very current pillar of regulation that all of the chief operating officers on this call will be very familiar with, and that's demonstrating operating resilience. And whether one defines it as operating resilience, which I would say is much broader, going to the governance of the legal entities, the control of management information flowing up and down through the organization, the management of risk, etc., or operational resilience, making sure that everything is always on, has been one of the great triumphs. And how we learn from that and take it forward and perhaps empower the employees that have all been able to deliver that, but also learn from their individual experiences what has worked that'll make the organization stronger. I think the other thing that is perhaps people have been unbelievably compliant with rules and regulations, compliant with their corporate codes of conduct. And that compliance demonstrates a real level of care for the organization, care for the clients, care for each other. And I think those are some of the sort of fantastic wins that we can really draw on to go forward.
Great, thank you, Michael. Michael Footman, any thoughts on that, and then any?
Yeah, look, I think it's been an interesting time that the whole world's gone through. I mean, if we look at some of the changes that were affected in the first quarter of last year, I mean, in a normal environment, it would have taken months, if not years, to get some of these changes approved. And really, I think part of this is the fact that all of the ways of working of financial institutions they were developed for a different time when business was conducted differently. All the policies and procedures assumed that you would be there, you would have access to information on site. The data leakage issues that potentially firms are exposed to now just didn't exist because of the type of control that was in place. So I think that the flexibility and agility that was demonstrated there really showed that when push comes to shove, if it becomes business critical and we can't operate anymore, the firms can move very quickly actually to get things done. So I think technology adoption, things like using video conferencing, some things got put in place so quickly. I was astounded by that. Some of the things we've had to put in place with clients around sharing of files and so forth, put in place very quickly because we wouldn't be able to do certain things otherwise. So it shows it's possible. And so I guess the one thing that it brings to mind, I think this quote comes from Bill Gates, I might be wrong, but it basically is along the lines of, we always overestimate the volume of change in 2 years, and we underestimate the amount of change in 10 years. This time around, we've definitely underestimated the change in even a 12-month period. But I think with this pace of change and the momentum we're seeing, the pace with which technology is going to come in to support functions now, it's just going to ramp up massively, as well as the way that control infrastructure is going to have to change, because people now have an expectation that I can work remotely and I will continue to do so when the world goes back to normal. So I think this is just going to create a lot of interesting situations for COOs to work through and challenges in the near future.
Sonia.
And to add to that, can certainly resonate, I mentioned our control exceptions process, which was much more an acceleration of process improvement, much quicker digitization, which given us increased opportunities with our clients for solutions. I think the thing that I would add to the previous discussion is also the opportunity it gave the firm to really reinforce our commitment to our employees and how vested we are in their well-being. And there was absolutely no doubt through COVID that the first priority of the firm was the well-being of its employees. And our technology to enable that, our access to our well-being tools, it's just moved markedly from what we had before. And we are much more enabled to sort of do regular pulse checks. So not our employee engagement survey that's every month, every year, whatever, but regular pulse checks on employee well-being and within teams, in smaller teams, which I think is a great benefit from COVID.
That's great, thank you. Sonia. Sorry, Sam.
So yeah, I mean, I think just building on what everybody else has said, I think the biggest thing for me is really accelerated the financial services, like in a way that if we hadn't have had COVID, we'll probably still be doing, take us 20 years in terms of whether it be technology, whether it be busting bureaucracy to make decisions and get approvals, whether it be, that flexible working, because I mean, let's face it, particularly out here in Asia, if you weren't in the office, people were, there certainly wasn't the open-mindedness that you were actually working, and so I think that really has accelerated a lot of thinking from an industry that was maybe a little bit in the dark ages in some aspects. But I do, just picking up on Sonia's point about the real focus on the employee's well-being, I think out of everything, the spotlight on mental wellness is just huge now. It is, it was topics that maybe people, again, weren't talking about, whereas now everybody has got their story where they have, that they've lived through it, they've had some stresses, whether it be personal, whether it be work-related. And I think, that firms have really acknowledged that in a way that it's not black and white, it's very grey and it's not easy to measure, but it's really essential to help everybody get through the last 12, 18 months. And also, I think, though, that it has really, as Michael said, it set the expectations for, okay, what are we going to do going forward? And I think the organizations that are able to take all of these positives and say, right, what has worked well to move forward, they're going to give themselves a kind of a first mover advantage over attracting talent, retaining talent, and really working with their customers and with the communities. And I think, COOs, they're like the glue that holds it together, right? As we've said, they really get to see things front to back, and they get to see a lot of where the pain points are and where the wins are as well. And I think they really are sort of the beating heart in all of this going forward. So I think, they play a critical role, and hats off to certainly all my colleagues in the organisation. They have done a phenomenal role over the last 12, 18 months in keeping everybody, sane, in the right direction, communication going, and really tough challenges where, resiliency testing is normally 24 hours, not alone sort of, coming up for 24 months or this sort of thing. And so, they've really sort of kept us in good order, and it hasn't been easy, but I think we've got a lot to take away and a lot of positives that we can use going forward.
That's great, thank you. So we've got 10 minutes left, but perhaps what I'll do is I'll put some closing remarks, and then if I can turn to the panel to just give some closing remarks as well. But what I thought would really useful, and Michael, so Colefontaine, I'm going to be sort of picking up from something that you had mentioned, and I recommend people read, is the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment report, Restoring Trust, the case for the retail financial services industry to rethink purpose. And I think we've covered so many of these points, which is really for companies to commit to operating by fundamental values, which includes delivering the value to their customers in terms of how they think, doing that fairly and ethically, investing in employees, which all of you have mentioned in terms of, how do you embrace and engage your employees? How do you invest in them and in their future? Dealing fairly and ethically with suppliers and partners, supporting the communities and the societies in which we operate, protecting the environment by embracing sustainable practices, and then generating long-term value for shareholders who provide the capital that allows companies to invest, grow, and innovate, and therefore continue to benefit all stakeholders. And I just thought that was a great way of sort of closing out all the fantastic comments. So welcome any closing comments from each of you. And there is one question, which I think the last question that we've had come through, which is very interesting, and most certainly for me as I've moved into my new career as an INED, is what is the role? We've talked about the executives, but what about the role of the board to drive purpose and culture? And I think it'll be interesting to get the panelists' thoughts on that as part of your closing remarks as well, because obviously it's the whole, it drives it from the top as well. So Sam, let me start.
Sure. So I think just starting with that question, I think for me, the board is, you've got the executives that are responsible for driving and defining the strategy and executing it within an organization. But for me, the board is to hold the executives accountable for that. But they have very much joint ownership in responsibility in making sure there is the right purpose set for each organization. So that just responds to that question. I think, just in closing, this is a time in our lives that every single one of us will remember, because every one of us have got our own COVID story, whether it be personally, whether it be work-wise. And I think it really is important and critical for us just to take a step back and just think about what is it that if we reflect, rarely in my life have I actually sort of said I'm going to reflect on the last 12, 18 months, but I really feel this is kind of at a crossroads where now is the time to do that. And there has been a lot of sadness, and I think many of us have, if not everyone, has been touched by that. But actually, there's been a huge amount of incredible acts of human kindness that I have seen both at work and out of work. And, it's made people slow down and really sort of get back to basics and get back to their core values, whether it be with their families, whether it be their friends or their communities. And I think for me, that is really the hook that we need to sort of reconnect and remember going forward as we come out of this pandemic, because we will, and we will be in a better place. So that's my closing thoughts.
Thank you. Sonia?
I was just reflecting on how much we use the word personalized, or, giving your own personal perspective, telling personal stories, personal visualization of the personal impact, and making people known through having more personal contact with them, telling those stories that make people feel that they know the leadership. And I think it just reflecting on, if there's something I take from today, is just to really think how we can make that so much more personal to our employees and how we can keep telling those personal stories that connect with their own values.
Thank you. Excellent. Michael Footman.
I exactly the same thing as Sonia, actually, when she's talking about making it personal. My example slide is probably more around how do you make it personal to the person who's running a retail banking branch in the middle of a very suburban area, but at the same time, it's relevant to somebody working in the largest aspect of the financial institutions group. How do you make sure that they understand it in the same way so that they can live the value? So I totally agree on the personal aspect of that. I think the other thing is also, and these panel discussions are great for it, is just the exchange of views, because everybody has gone through it in a very similar way. It seems very much like it's the same issue. I'm dealing with my own issues, and other people can't have the same problem. But the more people you talk to, it's actually the same issue across the board. So I think some of the industry bodies we talk to, it's the same pain points, it's the same risks which are coming out time and again. So how the people get together and really start trying to, even if it's defining our industry standards or how we want to operate as an industry, it just helps everybody to raise the game, because the industry is seen together. Any laggers, it will reflect on the industry as a whole. So I feel that industry connectivity is a really key part of that, to make sure that the perception of financial services and the purpose that it's seen with it is continuing to go the right direction for everybody.
Thank you. That's great, Michael. Michael Cole-Fontaine, as you started our discussion with your great keynotes, if I could leave the last thoughts to you, and I think it feeds very well into Michael's comments around industry and industry bodies and the role that the industry can play. But any last closing thoughts for you?
Well, just taking it back to our questioner's comment on the boards, and I think Sam gave a very good description of the role of the board versus executive management, but it's that feeling of one team. The board being great ambassadors for the organization and bringing whatever intelligence that can be brought to bear to keep that constant striving for being the best that your organization can be, overseeing obviously the execution of the strategy, promoting that ongoing sustainability and resiliency agenda, making sure that the board is challenging itself on its composition and its effectiveness. And of course, focusing on how the workforce transformation and the new ways of working that we're all going to be enjoying can be implemented in a way that feels empowering, feels animating, and takes into account exactly what we've all just been saying, that personal human aspect. And just in finally closing, I'm thrilled that Sam raised the mental health agenda. It's something very near and dear to my heart, and I know that the City Mental Health Alliance has done a lot of fabulous work in supporting the wider financial services and professional services ecosystem, and is now present in Hong Kong as much as it is in London as well. So thank you, Ursula.
Thank you very much, and we're right on time. I would really like to thank the panel, Michael, for your keynote speech, and all the other panelists, Michael, Sam, Sonia, for your input. A great discussion, and thank you so much. Thank you for the audience, and we really appreciate your engagement with all your questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you.